Dear Joe, thank you so much for your time and availability to meet and talk with me.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Glad to be here.
During our last meeting, I thoroughly appreciate the exchange that we had about your path in becoming a writer. Though, allow me, before going into that line of questioning, to ask you a different question. How has your Masonic journey started?
Well, it's interesting. So, my father was a Freemason, and I think going back maybe seven people that I can count, maybe seven. It's probably six, but maybe seven in our family. And what was interesting about it is that when I wanted to write, like when I was a kid, I would read like the Herodom books, like like Art de Hoyos and those guys would write. And funny enough, like later on, I ended up like working with them. So it's been kind of a full circle journey for me. So like when I went to college, I wanted to be a history professor starting out, and then my dad kind of pulled me aside and said, you're probably not going to be able to have a family if you do something like this. And so I went the engineering path, and then I ended up doing the family real estate business anyway. So it's kind of like my life's kind of like full circle. And what was funny is like he pointed out that like, well, you want to write these things, but it's really like a hobby. And so it's kind of like a hobby that's I'm really very serious about.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's funny. I grew up reading Mickey Mouse. I didn't reading the Hoyo, so that's why probably. Joe, this question I'm going to put you under the spotlight.
Sure.
Are you an Illuminatus?
Oh no, those guys have been. Philosophically, do I align with a lot of their ideals? Absolutely, but unfortunately, they haven't been around since 1788. And that's about it.
Yeah, Thank you, Joe. Joe, going through your book, going through the way that you write, in my opinion, you do not narrate a story. Your way of approaching the text that you write is like a forensic pathologist. And you peel the original material that is at your reach and you present it to us, dissected of its emblems. And you present it to us the material beyond the surface. Where have you learned such style, and how has it evolved across time?
That's interesting. So, well, first off, like I wanted to say thank you because like you're one of the few people that actually like took it and saw what it was I was doing. And like, so one of the things I don't like about some of the history books that I read quite a bit. Some people's style, it's like an open narration where it's devoid of facts, right? So they're telling you this story that they've already got. But what I approach it more like you say, a forensic approach, where I take it, I break it into its little pieces. And so it'd be like if you were like in a courtroom presenting evidence, you don't let the words speak for you, you let the evidence speak for you. And then so what I do is like when I write, it's in some ways I don't like what I do because it's a very dense style of writing, but it's important because what I'm doing is I'm building like fact blocks basically and putting them together and putting them in a way that in a style that it's really my own. I don't really know anyone else that writes that way. Um, but maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but it's my own style.
My personal opinion, it's very good because it's inspiring to actually don't be satisfied about one information, but the whole context around the information. That makes it even more inspiring to read more.
I think the other thing that gives like my writing style a little bit more weight too is like if you'll look at like when I write, I don't use other authors' sources. I don't use secondary sources. Everything I use is all primary sources, and that's another thing that I think that makes my style more impactful is because I'm not taking the words of others. And what I may do, like in like an introduction or as I'm like mid paragraph or something, I'll loop back in another person's idea, but I'm developing my own line of thought based on the sources because the trouble is if you look at a lot of like historical styles, people like are basically they're not investigators, they're recyclers, right? Like they take other
Yeah,
information, recycle it. It's like, oh, this person said it, so it has to be a fact. But is it a
yeah.
fact? And that's why I always get to primary sources. And when I get there and I find the information, that's when I stop digging and start assembling.
I understand that writing a book is not an easy exercise. It's complex. It requires just a really strong mindset that allows you to have constantly both the helicopter view and the detail view. And when you start your journey about writing something, not necessarily you end up the journey exactly with the same way that you were envisioning it. Were you surprised at the end of your book when you presented, the manuscript? Oh, it was exactly what you expected.
It's exactly what I expected because it was
Wow.
careful and it was deliberate. Like The Secret School, like it took us 5 years to do that book because we started with all the printed sources, right? So like our thought process was this book's going to get a lot of scrutiny because it's all the Illuminati entire system. No one's ever done anything like this because most of it's been in archive, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did first is we started with printed exposures. And then once we had like, okay, here's what was said against them, then we went to the real text. And then there's quite a bit of differences, and some of it's mistakes, but there's lots of variations in the copy. And that's what took the most time doing, was going from the printed to the manuscript, and then the manuscript comparing not one, but every example we have. And so that's what made the difference. And I think, that book is like, it's a great technical accomplishment to me
It is.
because it really took a lot of time. And I think, Reinhard was indispensable on this one, and he's the one who got me the access to the original stuff anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Beyond the fuss and the buzz about the order that is on the internet and videos and films, etc., where does your interest on the Illuminati comes from?
Well, it's kind of like this. Like I take a different approach of like looking at history in the sense that we have a finite amount of time on this earth, right? So does it make sense to go like, dig in really deep on your local lodge, or because your time is precious, does it make sense to go after precious information? And so, one of the things early on when I was, reading about the Illuminati, and it was mainly from conspiracy sources, right? Because that's all that really existed on that subject, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's a problem too, like if you're trying to get to that kind of information. But I looked at it and I was like, well, the most exotic, sexy thing out there is the Illuminati. So if you can go accomplish that one, like that should be quite valuable. And that's my approach. So like all the books and stuff that I'm going to write and are in writing right now, it's super rare material, and that's what I'm going after. So it's like like I'm a connoisseur, right? Like that's what I'm doing, is going after the exotic things, because the other things people can do, I want to waste the time I've got left here on this earth doing the valuable stuff.
Joe, as every pure initiative creating a better society, this fails very often due to personal interest, power grabs or financial interest, or confrontational type of situation, Weishaupt and Knigge. Can you zoom out for 1 second about the dualism about the story of the Illuminati and explain to us, based on the work that you have done and the investigation that you make, about the historical context and the explosion of secret societies in those days in Europe and in young America as well?
Sure. And so like within all like these systems, that's what, like, it's not the Illuminati story isn't unique. That's what's really interesting about this. If you look at all these other secret societies, whether it's the Golden Rosy Cross, there's like there's tons of them, right? The strict observance, that's the real one, to be honest, because the Illuminati didn't get their members because they were great at recruiting. They got their members because the leading secret society in Germany folded in 1782, and it was them and the Rosicrucians kind of picking the members off, right? So you even got secret societies cannibalizing other secret societies for membership, like when they fail. And so like what we see in that kind of dualism is, it's always like there's protagonist, antagonist, but it really depends on like what your perspective is on who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. But like between them, like the idea was Adam Weishaupt's vision for a secret academy, right? He's a college professor. He doesn't care about ceremonies and this sort of thing. We'll look at Knigge, though, like he wants a Masonic high degree system, and that's the real conflict. And what's interesting is in the book I've got coming out, it's the improved system of the Illuminati. And so it's Weishaupt's, and a lot of people assumed it was apologetics because he said he wrote this in 1784. He did. And I found manuscript copies of it from that period. And so and it was right before Knigge resigned the order. And so what they were doing is they were fighting over the system. So Weishaupt's proposal, right when he was about to resign, was to just toss all the rituals and all the ceremonies and make it like purely like a philosophical society again. But ultimately it was rejected. And so he published that book later because he got kicked out of the secret society he founded. So it wasn't just apologetics. It was actually a real plan that didn't pan out.
In your opinion, I mean, here we are talking about Germany, North Germany, South of Germany, the conflict that is also in the nation. But why internationally, Weishaupt failed? Because he tried to get outside Germany. We have example that you described in France, England, and so on. What was the major failure there? There was no Knigge.
Well, so it has structural failures. The number one reason why they were destined for failure is like, let's look at the psychology of an Adam Weishaupt, right? Like he's raised by his godfather, the Baron von Ickstad. Both of his parents died at a young age. His godfather is the book censor, but instead of burning the books, he keeps the books. And so Weishaupt grows up reading the books you're not supposed to read, right? And so like he's into like he wants to see the Enlightenment. And that point in time, like in the northern part of Germany, since the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, Frederick the Great instituted a policy of what they call it was absolute something, but I call it absolute despotism, whatever that. The point was like it was enlightenment by edict. You will be free, agrarian land reforms, education, all these things, establishing academies of sciences. It came late to Bavaria because, it's like the Protestant versus Catholic thing.
Right.
The Jesuits and their institutions controlled academia until about 1774 when they're disbanded. And so what you're seeing is like, that's another duality. That's, the Protestant states of Germany, because they're not a united country at this point,
Right.
Protestant states versus your Catholic states. And so the Enlightenment comes in late. And just as it's coming in, and I can't even remember the person's name, but whoever was before the elector, the Duke of Bavaria, Maximilian III, that was the one. Yeah. So when he dies, he starts bringing in the Bavarian Academy of the Sciences. Everything's looking great for the Enlightenment. And then when he dies without an heir, his cousin, the Karl Theodor, becomes the elector, and he pulls the rug out from underneath it. So from Weishaupt's perspective, he's a young professor in his 30s. He's probably some sort of like narcissist, if not like with sociopathic tendencies, right? Because who else would want to like make a system for the happiness of mankind based on my ideas, of course. And this is where it's going. So what we see in like all these secret societies, if we break them down to the real components, you've got some sort of cult of personality figure. You've got a system of mysteries that's actually attractive and does teach things, but also it's a system to like to bring members to the cult of personality, right? And so in a lot of these systems, that's if you break it down to what its real parts are, whether it's the Illuminati, it could be the rectified Scottish Rite, the strict observance, the Golden Rosy Cross, all these different types of systems or even the Elu Cohen, right? It's the same thing, like where they have cult of personality, attractive ritual system that does teach lessons and values, because if it was hollow, no one would want to be a part of it. The other thing is money. So when we were talking about why did Weishaupt fail, well, it's like this, like it's a college professor organizing a secret society for his students. These people aren't prone to money. And so they wanted to do the opposite of the strict observance, where it was a very expensive thing for very refined people, right? The basically the elective society are parts of the strict observance. So they want to do a bottom up reform. But the thing is, nobody has any money. So instead of being able to prescribe degree fees and monthly contributions, they leave it to the person's discretion. Well, I mean, what do you know? Like if you pass the hat around like that, there might be a few big bills, but a lot of them are going to be small, and that's the point. And so without a financial structure, they were forced to basically graft themselves onto Freemasonry for this reason. So Weishaupt didn't envision it this way. He wanted it to be its own standalone thing. But then as these guys start graduating college, they become Masons. Here's an idea. We'll link up to these guys for more members.
Yeah.
And so what the goal was like, it was kind of like a hostile corporate takeover model for lodges. And what they would do is capture the officers, right? And that even to the point where they came up with the eclectic rite. So like that's one project I'm working on the side is I've got the 1781 Illuminati rituals. And if you compare them to the 1784 eclectic rite rituals, it's the same ritual and it's not an accident. Wow. And so they had an association with them until 1789 and some 35 lodges all over Germany, right? And so the model's always the same. They would go and they would approach the officers. Oh, here's this new system. We're just going to have these 3 standardized degrees and liberty of choice of the lodge for high degrees, right? But also we're in this other secret society and you get to be a high ranking member of it if you go along with us. And so that's how they would do it is. So it's liberty of conscience for the lodge, no grand lodge. So it's a union of lodges that are now not connected to a grand lodge. It's like a circle is what they were doing, basically, making their own standalone grand lodge. And so that's the model they were using.
Joe, if I needed any historical reference where big data companies got inspired from, and I'm thinking about any tech company or the Cambridge Analytical case in particular, well, I now know the Weishaupt might be considered even a founding father of the big data concept. His obsession about knowing everything about each member it was almost disturbing. Physical description, personal, professional, family network interest, food, reading, family members. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. If anyone saw a documentary titled Terms and Conditions Might Apply, or any other documentary about social media companies, they will recognize the same pattern, in my opinion. So, out of curiosity, would it be possible that excluding the tension between Weishaupt and Knigge, one of the major flaws of the Illuminati was the annihilation of the self, because you had so much control of every individual?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not an accident, right? So he's trying to create a utopian society. When he's writing the material, the American Revolution is going on, but hasn't succeeded yet. Um, so what I'm getting at is he doesn't have any good examples really to follow. So philosophically, he's like more like of the French school, to be honest. I mean, like it's a whole lot of Rousseau, another guy that's obscure named Bonnet, and a few other people. He also likes a lot of German philosophers, but they too are also influenced by these French authors, and that's because the Enlightenment, like it really gets moving there a lot quicker than it gets going to Germany,
Yeah.
just because of all the conflict and stuff on the continent. But that said, though, like I think what's really interesting about it is that Weishaupt, like I said, like he's a more like I think he's really some kind of like a sociopath or something like this. And he's not a malevolent one where he's out to destroy society, but he's got this crazy magical thinking
Obsession,
that his idea is going to fix the world.
yeah, exactly.
That is a special kind of crazy, actually.
We can define like that. Yeah.
And so so with that whole thing, like that kind of paranoia, I think is what breeds it. So on the one hand, what he thinks the way he envisions himself, because we're translating all of his books right now, and as I'm going through these books and like really like and studying it in my native language, like it's eye-opening, because what you see is this guy literally like he drinks his own Kool-Aid, right? Like he really believes in his heart that he can do this stuff, and he looks at people not as people but as machines, right? And so what he's doing is he's not trying to break the self down. That's the result. But what he's trying to do is isolate all the moving parts. So that way, if he thinks he can tweak someone a little bit better, he just has to adjust a few levers and turn a few screws and that sort of thing. But that's really the way what he's. If you look at his style, he's doing is he's breaking people down not as people but as machines, and not necessarily to control them, but like in his mind to make them better, to perfect them, to make but that's a very slippery slope.
Exactly. If it wasn't for the conspiratorial and Hollywood fascination about the Illuminati, do you think we would have been talking about disorder at all?
Well, I think it's inevitable, because the only historical references, right? You've got Proofs of a Conspiracy, 1798, John Robeson, also 1798, Augustine Barruel's Memories on the History of Jacobinism, Volume 3. That's the one of that 4-volume book set that covers the Illuminati. And so they each have their own bent against the Illuminati. And I've really flesh this one out probably in other interviews. It's not worth our time right now. But the point is that all the reference material in English were conspiracy books prior to mine. Oh, actually, no, there was Vernon Stauffer in 1918 did History of the Bavarian Illuminati. I think that was another good book. And it was actually somewhat well done, but unfortunately he had to reference conspiracy books in it. So that's the trouble, is he didn't reference primary sources. It was someone else's words. It was a conspiracy theorist. And also
so you end up in the
German very well. They couldn't do that very well either. So yeah, that's what it was. So I think like it comes like it was always in that conspiracy vein all along. And if you look over time, people reinvented the conspiracy theory so much so that by like the early 20th century, that's when Nesta Webster and people like that started putting the whole It's the Jewish Illuminati and this, that, and the other. And then, they've tied it to the protocols of the elders of Zion, and then they
Yeah.
ran with it. And then, like in the 50s in this country, there was a group like the John Birch Society that took it and rebuilt it again. And then in the 1990s, the whole Patriot movement, they rebuilt it again. And so what they do is they keep rolling this boogeyman out there. But actually, like, what's funny is that these people, they want to fight like the creation of some kind of world government or whatever it is. But actually, they're doing the wrong thing, because if you keep promoting these conspiracy theories, it's kind of like, I've got this little dog and it likes to sit on the rug and it chases its tail around in a circle all day long. That's what these people are doing. So if you want to affect change in the world and do something better, you need to stop chasing your tail on the rug like my little dog, and you need to go out there and affect change. Whatever it is you believe in, just go do it. But don't chase your tail on the rug.